All right, the second part of strain theory is Agnew's general strain theory. Sorry about that, the wrong button. Who is Agnew? Robert Agnew is a sociologist and criminologist, and his idea was to take Merton's theory and use it to make it more broad, okay? Make it apply to different types of situations, make it apply to different types of crimes, make it apply to different forms of social strain. Because what he read in reading Merton's work is that Merton was obsessed with the idea of economic conditions. And Merton sort of believed crime emerged from economic strain on people, which, economic strain is a big source of motivation to be a criminal based on his innovator model. But, we also know that lots of crime doesn't really fit well with economic approaches. So if we look at violent crime, for example, if we look at assault, not all assault is related to economic strain. And so what Agnew really wanted to do is he argues that it's not just economics, but it can be anything that causes undue frustration, which can lead people to act out in a deviant manner. Okay? It's not always about economics, although of course economics plays a very big role. So what are strain-producing events? He noticed several. Number one, failure to achieve value goals. Well, clearly this lines well with Merton's idea about strain. But what Agnew was arguing is that the achieved value goals may be something other than material conditions. It might be a happy marriage, or it might be a promotion at work that you didn't get, or it might be a certain educational attainment. So anything where you fail to achieve a valued goal for you can be a source of strain, which leads to deviant behavior. Removal of positive valued stimuli or positively valued stimuli in your environment. So if something is there that provides you with a source of happiness and pleasure and comfort, and then it's taken away, that can be a source of strain. Okay, so if a divorce and disconnected from your family, and if your children were a source of positive stimuli for you, but then a divorce, you're no longer with them, that can cause significant strain. And when we study divorced families and the conflicts they go through, particularly post-divorce, we can see how that manifests. If we just look at Amber Alerts in kidnappings in the United States, we know statistically that most of those Amber Alert / kidnappings are what? They're custody disputes. They are not, stranger abductions. Occasionally it does happen. But for the most part, people are abducted, children are abducted by a non-custodial family member or parent. Okay, so we know that the removal of positively valued stimuli from an environment can cause strain. So we'll come back to this in a second. All right. The advent of negative stimuli. So a source of strain shows up in your life. It could be an illness. It can be an illness of a family member. It can be loss of a job, unemployment. Again, back to economics. But it doesn't have to be. It could be that your ex-wife gets a new boyfriend and that sets you off. It can be a number of things. So long as it is a negative stimuli to you, it can set you off on a strain instead of frustration. So let's go back to the Dan White case again. Twinkie defense, right? This was his whole defense. It was based on Agnew's strain theory. Is that he killed those two guys. It doesn't fit Merton's strain theory, but it certainly fits Agnew's. He killed those two guys. He killed he killed Harvey Milk, and he killed Mayor Masson. Why? Because of primarily because of the removal of positively valued stimuli. What were the positively valued stimuli in his environment? They were his job with the fire department, that he was forced to resign from in order to stay on the city council. It was his job on the city council that he was forced to resigned from because he couldn't afford to support his family without the income from the fire department. And it was a presentation of negative stimuli in his environment. You know, his constituents were really upset that he resigned, called him a traitor to the cause. These things created frustration. And essentially, Dan White acted out of frustration by killing 2 people and going to prison for it, and then ultimately killing himself because of the remorse he had for taking those 2 guys' lives. Strain producing events. All right. This is a link to an article that I wrote on people and strain, economic strain, and their attachment to guns and their propensity for violence. And it's essentially what we found here. I wrote this with Dr. Froese in the Department of Sociology, is that people who experienced severe forms of economic strain, which we called economic precarity, during the Great Recession from 2008 to 2010, if they had their house foreclosed on, if they lost their job, if a family member lost a job, had they been unemployed for X number of months, the more of these forms of strain they had in their lives, and what we found is that over half the sample had multiple forms of strain in their lives at that time. The more strain you had in your life, the more moral certainty you felt towards your firearms. And then in the sense that they made you feel, most importantly, they made you feel respected, and they made you feel as a valued member of your community. And in turn, those who had all of these high levels of economic precarity were also very pro-violent in terms of they felt like violence was okay to use in disputes, and that lethal violence in particular was a justifiable form of action against the government and government officials that they thought were doing something that was inappropriate. So strain does produce events. So general strain theory has some benefits over Merton. One thing Merton could not explain was what we call crimes of passion. And so when we get into the chapter on homicide, we're going to see that homicide and aggravated assault, particularly domestic violence, are crimes of passion. And these are cases in which lethal violence quickly escalated, or violent acts quickly escalated to a lethal level. It might be a bar fight that gets out of control. It might be a husband and wife or a boyfriend and girlfriend who get into an argument, and maybe they've been drinking or taking drugs or something. There's usually some extenuating circumstances. But whatever it is, it escalates to a level of lethal violence or near lethal violence in the case of aggravated assault or domestic violence. Merton's theory didn't work so well in explaining crimes of passion. Now, it's a very good theory for explaining property crime, Merton was, but not so good at explaining violent crime, particularly violent crime that is a crime of passion. General strain theory shows the strongest relationship between people's social class and the most serious forms of crime, such as homicide and aggravated assault, with, again, the 2 highest ranking crimes in the Uniform Crime Report on the violent crime side. And the idea is that people from lower social classes are more likely to be involved in such activities. His argument is that it is more to do with strain. Others who study strain, particularly Blau and Rosenfeld, talk about this concept of relative deprivation. And they argue that strain is also a product of deprivation. And what I mean by that is Poor people who live in poor areas where they don't see a lot of disparity in lifestyle, places that are where everybody's poor, there's not a lot of relative deprivation. Everybody's in the same boat. Places where everybody's rich, the same story, same conclusion. There's not a lot of deprivation. Everybody's rich. It's in mixed areas. It's in cities and suburbs of cities where you have a combination of both very poor and very rich people. Their argument is that in the highest levels of inequality, in other words, we have neighborhoods or not neighborhoods, but parts of town where very rich people and very poor people are sort of close together, or they interact with each other on a more frequent basis. That's where you have the most strain-related crimes. All right. Strain theory is a criminological theory that has spun off quite a few policy implications. Not spurned, spun off. So what the idea here is that the strain theory model was to give those in a lower class a better chance to succeed. And one of the ways it did that was you have to teach people the importance of using the institutionalized means. And so, you can tell people, you got to do this. You've got to work hard. You got to get that education. That's the most important thing. Get away from crime. You don't want to fall into a life of crime. And so two particular policy implications that resulted, or policy programs that resulted from strain theory, are what's called Head Start, which is for young kids, and it's an opportunity, preschool age kids participate in a program which is educational in nature, and it gives them lots of the opportunities they have to learn. And I started school in 1969. I started first grade. I did not know how to read when I started first grade. Where I grew up, kindergarten was basically church-a-garden. So you went to church and you played games and you made stuff, but it wasn't an educational thing. Like today, kindergarten is very educational. My son started kindergarten in 2006. He could read. He could already read before he started kindergarten. But in my days, you couldn't. So, many kids who have a leg up when they start school, if they can read when they get to school, they're going to be far ahead of the kids who can't read when they get to school. And so Head Start is a program that started in the 60s and 70s. And the basic idea was to get people from low-income neighborhoods, teach them some basics about education, particularly if you can teach kids how to read and do simple math before they start school, they have a much higher chance of being successful in school. The other program is Job Corps. And Job Corps was a program that trained inner city youth and some people from rural areas job skills, so that when they got out of school, they could head straight into the workforce with a good set of skills instead of being basically unemployable because they didn't really have anything. And when you're unemployable, chances are you're not going to find the job, and you're not going to get the cultural goals of wealth, and then you may decide to innovate and break bad and get into crime.